Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, May 21st, 2020. Time for yet another show. More or less ready, I think. It looks like Greg has already built up a reservoir of good material to share on the show today. The raft has turned into a reservoir, as the dam broke and we moved all the water from one place to another. I don't know what the technical terminology is. And, technically, I don't even know if I see that raft of stories yet, but I have seen him retweeting up a storm, so I know approximately what he's got to bring to the show, some of which I was getting set to pocket it myself, and then I said, there goes Greg retweeting this, either the same thing or, hey, that's Greg's name on it, as a matter of fact, right now. So I'm excited to see what we can bring to the show. There's lots of news from all aspects of life today, let's say, and a lot of other contributions to share as well. Daily Coast Radio with me is live now. I've found out by listening to Bill tweet this all the way from Portland, Maine, and a little shake up to the intro here. Daily Coast Radio with me, David Waldman, Kagro X. You'll find me on Twitter, of course. Live now, today's contest. Always love the contest. Be the 50th caller. So we're going to have to wait about 6 years to get to our 50th caller. We'll be the 50th caller, and you'll win a super duper missile. Oh yeah, we didn't even get to talk about that one. Filled with the hydroxy, courtesy of your friends at Space Force, and some dark money site that I can't mention by name, or they'll kill me. Sounds about right. And I don't even think that's in the news. And why not? Anything can be right. One of the things I happened to notice in the news earlier today, let's see if I can't, I think I may have pocketed this more because I was amazed at I wanted to read this story later on to myself. And increasingly I'm finding that pocket is where I'm storing things. I say, well, this says no place on the show, but I need that recipe or something like that. I have nowhere else to store things reliably. So much news flying by so quickly. Really wasn't counting on this one this morning, but a claim in a couple of publications. Scientists may have discovered, I don't know, a parallel universe where physics and time work backwards. All right, so moving on from there, Michigan Secretary of State apparently has some accusations to make about the president and his tweets yesterday. Various things are happening where Republicans are screwing people up. There's a pandemic, etc. Whatever. But yeah, was it Matt Browner Hamlin who was tweeting? I gotta go and check back on my records and see who it was who was sending this one around. But with the comment, the apt comment that in a world where tweeting of just a few, days ago, weeks ago, I've lost track of time, of course, that there might, in fact, here's some pictures that the Air Force has been hiding of UFOs that they've encountered for X number of years. And that didn't even make a splash, I guess, in the middle of coronavirus and everything else that's going on. It's the amazing thing that this wouldn't shock us out of our complacency. P.S. There's a backwards parallel universe out there, which quite honestly, I was reading the article. This one's beyond me. But I thought it was rather interesting anyway to find out that there was a parallel universe. Yeah, Matt Browner Hamlin was the one who I think I saw tweet this one around. The comment was apt, right? Nice to have a story that will blow past "we've got videos of UFOs" in scope and importance to be completely ignored in the age of Trump and COVID. I can't explain this one to you. I can give you the very simplistic coverage of it that came from where, oh my gosh, too many pop-up ads for me to be able to tell you what this is. News 7 Boston, looks like the ABC affiliate from Boston. Here's the long and short of it. Scientists at NASA have reportedly uncovered evidence of a bizarre parallel universe where the rules of physics and time appear to be operating in reverse. And to be honest with you, as I read through this very short and not very explanatory article on it, it basically said that they were conducting an experiment and got readings that appeared to be backwards from everything that the traditional understanding of physics could possibly explain. So the conclusion was, oh, there's a parallel universe where everything is backwards and we've just encountered it, as opposed to my machine is broken. Somebody switched the sign in front of the numbers from positive to negative accidentally or whatever. To me, I'd be like, maybe something's wrong, versus what we should do is immediately go to publication with the news that there's a parallel universe where everything's backwards, and I found it by flying a balloon over Antarctica. Except, I guess they know what they're talking about, whereas I would be like, everything's broken. There's some meat to it, and then there's the original article, not just what got published in ABC 7, News 7 in Boston, which wasn't likely to be explaining it to you. Although, some of the consumers of the news there are, top university folks. They used to say top men in the movie. But now, of course, we would have to say top people of whatever identity. So, okay. We've made some progress there. Also in progress news, the sponsored content pop-up ad alongside this piece is a new kind of mask, apparently called the Curve, by O2 Canada. And I will tell you that for all intents and purposes, it looks like someone has taken an athletic cup and turned it upside down and called it a face mask. And I don't trust it. It bothers me that this could be marketed this way. And I don't know if I don't have information about the provenance of this thing, I'm not going to try it on. So how's that for a wake-up call this morning? Be aware of what you're putting on your face. The mask seems to be working. We have some information about that. I don't know if that's included among the Raft O stories that Greg has rounded up, but there's one way to find out. There's two ways to find out. One is backwards and in reverse from the parallel universe, and the other is to simply ask Greg, "Hi, Greg, what's going on?"
Hey, whenever you say backwards and reverse, I can't help but think a couple of years back of that phony YouTube video about the cheerleader, professional cheerleader for one of the sports teams who got a vaccine and from that point on could only walk backwards.
Really? That's it.
Do you remember that?
I don't remember that story, but I'm surprised.
Horrifying vaccine side effect.
Wow.
Person can only walk back. When she tries to walk forward, she gets all sort of dystonia. But when she walks backwards, it's perfectly normal. And this is a side effect of the vaccine. She's convinced.
So
all the doctors said this is nuts. The doctors can't figure out what's wrong with her. That's because there was nothing wrong with her.
Oh.
And then ultimately, she decided to go to some quack chelation therapy doc who cured her of everything, except it wasn't really a doc, just somebody who does their research on the internet. Well, and so that was a big story. I'll find that video for you. It's still on YouTube.
Sure. Was she able to cheer
Her name is
backwards?
Desiree something or other, and it was all a phony. This is why vaccines are bad for you, and these are the people who are running the government rallies now.
Yeah, well, that's true. We do have that problem. I mean, couldn't we just tell them you got a parallel universe vaccine?
Or maybe you remember the one with the backwards B carved into the forehead?
Oh, yeah, right. I remember that one. That no claims of parallel universe, but this offers up a whole new universe of excuses.
Those are the things I remember. I guess I should have remembered, Spock and Kirk, zapping out their enemies. But sure. I can't help but remember the lady who walks backwards because she thinks like we're all stupid or something.
There's all kinds. There's a guy who runs for president with a boot on his head, and another one who paints his face orange.
Yeah, I suppose. So parallel things happen. But in a parallel universe, we'd be actually collecting data and trying to do something about this pandemic instead of just watching and, having the death rates rise. I mean, there's so many people who have died, and the economy is just in terrible shape, and you can't make it go away just by willing it to be so. So let's go over some pandemic stuff, and then let's go over some political stuff.
All right.
So Scott Gottlieb, who is the ex-FDA commissioner, Republican, resident fellow, AEI.
Oh, you.
I actually like him. I've been following him on Twitter. We've been Twitter friends since before he was FDA commissioner. He's a conservative but relatively honest fellow, and that's so rare.
He must be from that other universe.
Yeah, exactly. So, for that reason, I've been following him for a while, and unfortunately, we're over-reliant on him for statistics because you can't trust the CDC anymore. Story about that in a minute. But he's posted national trends on hospitalizations.
Yes, okay.
And new deaths. I mean, hospitalizations and deaths are a much better way of trying to follow this. They can be fudged and are fudged by hiding numbers. But a more reliable guide to what's going on with the pandemic is how full are your hospitals and how full are your ICUs and how many people are dying in your area. And you can't necessarily rely on number of tests because you don't know whether they're all being reported. For example, in some states, Florida I think is one of them, they only report publicly known tests. If a private lab does a test, those labs are not obligated to report.
Yeah.
As one simple example of why you can't necessarily trust the numbers. So national trends, a small uptick in this past week showing sustained decline in preceding 2 weeks. It was anticipated that cases would rise as some distancing restrictions are removed. In fact, all 50 states have now removed some of those. Hence the careful staged nature of many reopening measures. Now, again, what people have to understand is that the purpose of shutting down these past couple of months was to buy time for testing and tracing, things we haven't done, and to get a national response ready, which we haven't done. It wasn't because we were going to shut down until we have a vaccine. That's going to take too long.
Yeah, or that shutting down was going to make
Trump
it go
has
away.
decided that everything works, so he's ignoring it all.
Oh, well, yeah, that's, I mean, par for the course.
Yeah, par for the course, but a problem. So this is the cut of the national COVID hospitalization data for states outside the New York tri-state region, showing that if you take New York, New Jersey, Connecticut out of it, those are pretty big hotspots, the number of new hospitalizations is actually going up. There was a hotspot reported in a rural county, I think Hancock County, if I remember correctly, in Georgia, one of the states that's opened up. And there's this lag time. Yeah. Between when you open up, when people start to get infected, which is about 2 weeks later, when those small number of infections start to go viral.
Oh, well, I thought you were searching for another word.
And that's another couple of weeks. So it's really a month before you start seeing spikes. Wow. It's too early to tell. And the idea that, it's all been a great success is belied by the actual data. Here's some actual data. Because the whole point of reopening is to help the economy because Trump needs that to get reelected and people need that to make a living. Those two are in parallel, which is why Trump's trying to do it and then claim he's doing it for the good of the country, when in fact he's only doing it for the good of himself. How do we know this? Because that's all he cares about. But this is from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel behind a paywall. I'm sorry, but what it says is Wisconsin Supreme Court order opened bars and restaurants, but an analysis shows only 3% increase in total movement statewide. So this happens over and over and over. The Republicans can fight for the demand to open, which is basically coming from their Chamber of Commerce and a few nutcases carrying guns. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of the public, 2/3, doesn't want the governments in their states to go too fast. Mm-hmm. 2/3 of the people in any given state agree with the idea that they should be wearing masks. Yes. We'll see that in the Quinnipiac poll.
That might be enough.
We'll do later. And what they did is they looked at a 7-day rolling average of the percent of mobile devices leaving the home locations in Wisconsin compared to other states. And what they found is that there was no giant movement to get out of the house once the Supreme Court decided to go partisan. What in fact happened is that there was a slow loosening of what you might call quarantine fatigue that we see in every state, even if you don't reduce the orders. And the public is basically voting with their feet on what they think is correct. And they're not going along with the state Supreme Court and the Republicans agitating to open up. They're slowly and cautiously starting to move around a little bit more. In Wisconsin, where movement increased by 20% in the past 5 weeks, the percentage of positive cases was flat. And there's many factors that might affect the percentage of positive cases, including who's being tested. But one factor is people who are moving more are being careful to keep their distance, wear a mask, and wash their hands. And that's exactly what you want. You want to carefully open up in a way that's safe, and that's what the public is doing.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of interesting. I saw similar discussions about this, and of course it being taken as, we never had to close in the first place, as opposed to, if you wear your mask and wash your hands and be careful and open at 25 to 50% capacity in select areas, you won't send cases through the roof, but they won't take yes for an answer. They want it all.
In the year 2000, people put a lot of money into making sure Y2K wasn't a problem, and then it wasn't a problem, and everybody laughed at all the people worried.
Yeah. But we paid a lot of people to do that, and see, that was
and there wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Why wasn't there a problem? Because people took steps to make sure there wasn't a problem. It was a success. You can complain about it all you want to.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's the whole idea. We could have paid the because same people. It was a success and there were no problems. You have the luxury and privilege of complaining about it.
Yeah.
We want that.
I guess. I don't know. Maybe we just framed the whole thing wrong.
We want to be able to say, we overreacted because nothing happened. That's what we want.
Yeah, we tried to tell everybody that. Everybody heard that story, but there's a lot of people just did not didn't want to believe it. Maybe it's a framing issue. We could have explained it differently.
I refuse to believe that anything is that dire. Okay, well, this pandemic is killing everybody. Well, you're exaggerating. I said, there's like
not me.
95,000 deaths. How many do you need to have before we're not talking about everybody? Everybody's affected. I mean, 50% of the people in the Northeast, in the New York City area, know somebody with the virus, and 25% in the rural areas. It's everybody.
Yes. Well, you got to have an immediate family member who,
and because of dying, this article in Wisconsin says throughout the pandemic, mobility has been highest in the South and lowest in the Northeast. That is not a coincidence. The two are linked.
Yes. Science. Parallel universe. What do you want me to do?
Whatever.
I mean, I just found out that somewhere none of that is true.
In Wisconsin, about 20% of residents started staying home prior to Governor Evers' order on March 24th.
Wow.
In other words, on March 6th, people canceled South by Southwest, and they canceled the Emerald City Comic-Con in Seattle. And people started to getting a clue, this is a problem on March 6th.
Yes.
And by March 24th, when the governor started to act, and by the way, there's a separate New York Times story showing that even a week made a big difference according to the models.
Yes.
People started on their own without waiting for government to tell them that maybe it wasn't a great idea to go out and mix and this and that and everything else. The purpose of making it official, of course, is so you can be qualified for unemployment insurance, which works both ways. Democratic governors wanted you on unemployment to help save the economy, and Republicans didn't want you on unemployment because they were afraid of exposing the fact that their unemployment system was bogus, like in Florida, and they didn't want to pay you, like in Georgia.
Yeah, I don't know why.
But people started to do this regardless. So Vox has this lovely piece today, for example, that says reopening the economy, you can't turn the economy back on like a light switch. Magical thinking on the economy won't make things the way they were before. And this Wisconsin article is a perfect example of that.
Okay.
So the science is the science, whether you're in a parallel universe or not. The economics are the economics. And you can't cheerlead or will the economy into being the way it was, the way Trump is trying to do, because that's not how people are reacting to it. They don't trust him, and they're not taking leads from him. So as said, Scott Gottlieb has given us some data on what's happening around the country. It's still too early to tell, and we still have to watch it. But this amazing article in The Atlantic that just published says, how could the CDC make that mistake? The government's disease-fighting agency is conflating viral and antibody tests compromising a few crucial metrics that governors depend on to reopen their economies. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Texas, and other states are doing the same.
Is that bad?
That's terrible, because then you don't really know what's going on. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is conflating the results from these two tests. We've learned the CDC is making at best a debilitating mistake, combining test results that diagnose current coronavirus infections with test results that measure whether somebody's ever had it. The upshot is the government's disease-fighting agencies overstating the country's ability to test people. Right? You don't have enough tests to test people who are sick, so you start adding in the tests from people who have already recovered, and now all of a sudden you're doing twice as many tests as you were.
Oh, okay.
And we're the greatest testing country in the world, says Trump. That's because he forced his people to lie about what's going on.
Yeah. My son just took a test for his online school. I wonder if they counted that.
Oh, he took a test. Look how many people were testing.
Yeah, right. He passed the history course and everything.
Good for him, but the important thing, he's now one of the tested people.
Right, yes. We have done 10 billion tests, which is probably about enough now, and we don't have to do anything anymore, I guess, is maybe it.
The agency confirmed to The Atlantic on Wednesday, that's yesterday, it's mixing the results of viral antibody tests, even though the two tests reveal different information and are used for different reasons. And not merely a technical error, states have sent quantitative guidelines for reopening their economies based on these flawed data points.
Yes.
Pennsylvania has one of the country's largest outbreaks, Texas, Georgia, Vermont. They're blending the data in the same way. Florida's doing it a different way. They're hiding it. Virginia likewise mixed viral and antibody test results until last week, but it reversed course, and the governor apologized for the practice after it was covered by the Richmond Times-Dispatch and The Atlantic.
Yeah.
Maine similarly separated its data on Wednesday. Vermont claimed they didn't even know they were doing this. The widespread use of the practice means it remains difficult to know exactly how much the country's ability to test people who are actively sick has improved.
Yeah.
Ashish Jha, the K.T. Lee professor of global health at Harvard, and a mensch, by the way, "You got to be kidding me," he said. He told us when he described what the CDC is doing. How could the CDC make this mistake? It's a mess. Ashish Jha is also director of the Harvard Global Health Institute, and I see why this article is so long. I mean, 3/4 of it is just listing his titles. I mean, but the guy knows what he's talking about. Viral tests taken by nose swab or saliva sample look for direct evidence of a coronavirus infection. They're considered the gold standard for diagnosing somebody. State governments consider a positive viral test to be the only way to confirm a case. Antibody tests, by contrast, use blood samples to look for biological signals that a person has been exposed to the virus in the past. We've covered that. We know the difference between an antibody test and an antigen test here, or a viral test. A negative test result means something different for each test. If somebody tests negative on a viral test, the doctor can be relatively confident they're not sick right now. If somebody tests negative on an antibody test, they've probably never been infected.
Okay.
The problem is the CDC is dumping negative results from both tests together in public reporting. That's what they have on their dashboard. Mixing the two tests makes it harder to understand the meaning of positive tests, and it clouds important information. The viral testing, said Jha, is to understand how many people are getting infected. The antibody testing is like looking in the rearview mirror. There's your rearview mirror backwards stuff. The two tests are totally different signals. By combining the two, the CDC's made them both uninterpretable. So now we don't really know what's going on.
And I thought we had problems when we were talking about asymptomaticity.
And this is by design. This is the fault of Robert Redfield, head of the CDC, and Alex Azar, his immediate boss, because they are falling victim, if you will, to political pressure from the White House, which they have no will to stop, which is why they have resigned. And Deborah Birx accepts this, though she should resign too. So that's the background to all of this. And that's why I think, it's important to get back to politics and look at this. This is E.J. Dionne this morning, and he's talking about polling, but he might as well be talking about testing. Trump's signal is his noise. Stop trying to distinguish between the two.
Oh, okay. The
noise is the signal. It's the sort of clamor that despotic leaders use to sell confusion, division, and distraction. This is purposeful on the part of the White House to lie about the data. Trump clearly knows, I added that part, this is EJ again, Trump clearly knows that accurate, meaningful information is his enemy. Too many voters whose support he needs have decided that his epic mishandling of the COVID-19 crisis has made both the pandemic and its economic consequences worse than they had to be. As a result, chaos and mystification are his only friends.
Well,
again, I interject. He's doing this on purpose. He wants the electorate and media to focus on absolutely anything except the virus's death toll and rising unemployment. Thus, his targeting of former President Obama, the hydroxychloroquine nonsense, the Michael Flynn stuff, and I would add, and screwing up and obfuscating the testing.
Okay.
And now they want to subpoena Joe Biden's son Hunter for Ukrainian energy company hearing on Capitol Hill. But of course, we all know that Biden doesn't have to do this. He can just say, no, congressional subpoenas don't mean anything because Trump has proven that in the Supreme Court.
Yes, or almost nearly so anyway. But that won't work because reasons, parallel universe, possibly.
Yes, it'd take me to court, and that'll take a year and a half. And by the time you get me up there, Biden's president, and that's the end of that. Right. So,
parallel universe.
It's all ridiculous stuff. In any case.
Yes, this one in particular. But any case will do.
E.J. Dionne has a very simple truth that I'll leave you with, and then we'll look at how it's playing out with the polls.
Okay.
Just a one line that summarizes everything about what Trump is doing. And that line is this. This approach is hitting its limits in the current crisis. Period. End of sentence.
Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, a lot of things are hitting their limits in current crisis.
They are. They're not buying it. The Supreme Court in Wisconsin can be as partisan as they want. People are still staying home. Trump can lie about testing. People still get sick. They're not giving him credit for handling this well. And it's showing up in his lack of support.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think this sort of article comes out every once in a while. I'm glad to see EJ adding his to the pile, but it's true. Trump is an idiot. We'll be back to discuss it after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I have just gotten an alert on the Weather Channel, which I guess if I had received this alert yesterday or 2 days ago, I might not have paid any attention to it, but now I can't find the alert, but it did pop up on my phone warning me that there was a dam in Virginia in danger of collapse. And yesterday or the day before, I would have said, dams don't collapse. But now, of course, they do because parallel universe. And even the one we're in, really, honestly, we have these physical forces that sometimes come to bear. But the one in Michigan, I didn't really understand exactly to whom this dam belonged, but apparently there was some sort of private ownership situation here, and we had a situation where the owner was able to say, you say collapse, I say success, until it finally exploded or something like that. I don't know what the situation is in Virginia, but probably all of you at this point, maybe you all got it. It was an individualized thing. Your phone rang and told you a dam in your state is going to burst. Probably true.
Damn.
It's infrastructure week.
Did you know?
Yes.
Did you know that 56% of dams in the United States are privately owned?
No. That is a damn interesting statistic, I guess. That's
locally owned 20%.
That was a thing you could do.
Undetermined 12%. That's my favorite. I don't know who owns this. You can't
beaver.
walk on it because it's mine, but if it breaks, it's yours.
Yeah, well, that's the situation we have with the privately owned ones. The other ones,
right. Federal 4.7%, state 4.8%, public utilities 2.4%. I thought the public utilities owned a lot more of these dams.
I thought so too.
Apparently they're in private hands.
I guess so, and they don't care until they collapse. That is very odd.
This is FEMA. I'm reading directly from the government FEMA site. Given the diffuse nature of dam ownership versus regulation in the United States, it's apparent that dam safety and security are often not solely a federal, state, or local issue. The safety and security of a dam can affect persons and property across local, state, and even national borders. An incident in one area can affect commerce, navigation, and power generation in another area. So there's a reasonable federal role to coordinate federal, state, and local efforts to provide dam safety. And FEMA coordinates partnerships. There's a national dam safety program partner. And they just go on to describe what they do to try to make sure dams are safe. Obviously failed in this case. But I didn't realize that more than half of the dams are privately owned, so this is not unusual.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess really because, when do you really give thought to dams at all?
We do this
Hoover
show, so
Dam.
I have an excuse to look stuff up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole point of talking to you.
That's the only reason I'm doing it at this point. Yeah, I mean, I that does. If you really sit and think about it, I guess most dams aren't Hoover Dam and gigantic public infrastructure projects. I guess most are. I own this land, and I think if I put a dam on here and turn this river into a lake, I can sell waterfront homes.
Well, it goes back hundreds of years and a millennia before that. I mean, medieval manors would have a dam to run the mill.
Right.
So the whole idea of having a dam on private land to get a little bit of water power to do what it is you wanted to do, or just make it more scenic, or maybe make it a fishing lake that you could stock, depending on how much money you had. Private dams, I guess, are not an odd concept.
I guess not.
It's been that way longer than it's not been that way.
Right. Mr. Darcy had one.
Yeah, but, just in this particular case, it's in the news now for a variety of reasons, including the fact that those dams have breaches and they've evacuated people, and Michigan is getting hit hard by that as well as the coronavirus, and Trump decides to attack the people of Michigan and the woman who happens to be the governor there, Gretchen Whitmer, who's far more popular than he is in Michigan. And that's one of the many places that Trump is at least at risk of losing in the fall. Now, there's not a particularly good pollster out, Hodis and Associates, with some wacky Biden-Trump data in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania today. Just worth mentioning. In Michigan, Biden is up by 9. In Wisconsin, Biden is up by 9. Anybody who believes Biden's up by 9 in Michigan has to, wash their glasses a little bit, clean their glasses. In Pennsylvania, Trump is up by 5. Now, the idea that Trump is up by 5 in Pennsylvania but down by 9 in Wisconsin tells you can ignore this poll.
Okay. What was it called? Hodis?
Hodas and Associates.
Hodas. Okay. Well, all right. By the way, in case
you could find it here on 538 that summarized all the latest polls.
Oh, well, okay, that's handy. If you were worried and you're on the edge of your seat, do I need to evacuate? Only if you are in Roanoke, Virginia, where the Spring Valley Dam is apparently in danger of failing, and I guess we're all supposed to take that seriously now. So, I don't know. Leave Roanoke immediately? I don't know. I'll contact your local authorities.
So let me give you some national and local, which is to say state numbers here for Trump, for Biden overall. And again, for those of you who say national polls are meaningless, you're just flat out wrong.
Oh.
They're meaningless when you're looking at a 2 or 3 point difference. When you're looking at a 5 or 6 point difference or more,
yes,
the national polls don't jump out of nowhere. They don't spring full-blown out of the head of Zeus. They actually reflect what's going on in the states. So, for example, as a thought experiment, if Biden is up by 11,
nationally,
as yesterday's Quinnipiac poll says he is.
All right. Is that a national?
National
trying
poll.
to follow our example. Yes. Okay,
Biden up by 11 over Trump. And then I told you that Georgia and Texas and Arizona and North Carolina were all very competitive. You would not be surprised because you saw that national poll and said, well, if Biden is leading by 11 nationally, of course North Carolina and Iowa and Texas and Georgia and Arizona are going to be competitive.
Right.
And that's how it works.
Yeah. Or else he would only be leading by 4.
Yeah, or 3. Like if he's only leading by 4 or 3, then you go, oh my gosh, I wonder what's going on in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, because obviously everybody knows, as a elections expert, that the Electoral College is what matters, and you have to look at those 3 states.
Okay.
But when you're up by 15 or 11, then you don't have to be an expert.
Yeah, you might have to watch a few polls. People who've never seen polls before. You don't
have to look at Herschel Waukesha County. You don't have to do those things.
I get you. You could walk it backwards from. If you told me that Biden was leading by 100% to 0, would I need state polling? No.
Exactly. That's the most extreme example that proves the point. You don't need it if the lead is big. If the lead is small, you do. So let's look at some of these numbers here.
Okay.
Data for progress. Biden 51, Trump 42.
Okay, that sounds like a partisan
registered
poll.
Voters. Okay.
Yes.
But here's an interesting stat about this. Data for Progress, a B- ranked poll by 538, has Biden over Trump 51-42. They call that a 10-point lead. They're rounding. Okay. But
come on now. Yeah.
That's registered voters.
We're rounding. They might not be registered. We're just rounding. Okay.
If you look at all adults in the same poll, Biden's got an 8-point lead with all adults, and with a registered voter group, a 10-point lead.
Aha.
The registered voters are more Democratic than all adults. Very unusual. But this is unusual circumstance.
Yes, pandemic, president sucked anyway. All right.
Yes. Now, is that a complete and total surprise? Not really, because last night, as it turns out, Charles Franklin was tweeting a little bit about some of the data that he's had looking at his own MU law poll. And there's some pretty fascinating stuff that he found. Let me just find it so I can give you the link so you can follow along. He posted a little mini tweet thread last night called This and That in Wisconsin Politics.
Oh.
Here's a review of some recent MU law poll results focused on the presidential election. It's +3 Biden in March and in May. And if you take all the data between August and May, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Right? The mean average lead for Biden, 2.96.
Okay.
That's about as stable can be.
Yes.
Just like his national poll is stable at 6. It's not like 2016, folks, which was very volatile.
March and May.
Very stable lead in Wisconsin, one of the key states. Now, here's vote by certainty of voting. That is to say, likely voters.
All right.
All right?
Yes.
Absolutely certain to vote, Biden has a slight lead.
Okay.
Very likely to vote, Biden has a slight lead. 50-50 to vote, Biden has a big lead.
All right.
Will not vote at all, Trump has a slight lead.
Okay. Will not vote at all.
That's why
what do we do
when
with
you
that?
look at the data from Data for Progress and say, gee, the likely voters, or the, in this case, registered voters, are more Democratic than all adults, that's true in Wisconsin as well.
Yes. Unless
that's not usual. This is not usual stuff. Usually all adults, which include minorities that often don't vote, and kids who often don't vote, are more Democratic.
Yeah.
The implication is those groups have decided to vote, or at least they're 50-50.
I guess so. I've never seen a poll that counted, I will not vote no matter what, but okay. That's not the point of this.
Right?
I'm just.
Well, that's why Charles Franklin's so good. He asked these questions.
I guess so.
Okay.
Full picture, right?
Here's one. Enthusiasm for voting in November by candidate choice. Here's one you hear all the time.
Enthusiasms.
Yes.
Oh, gosh, the Trump people are so much more enthusiastic. Well, not in Wisconsin, they're not.
Well,
Here's your
I'm
vote choice.
embarrassed
For
by
Joe Biden,
being
very
dead.
enthusiastic, 71, somewhat 21. For Donald Trump, 70%, very enthusiastic, somewhat 20.
Huh.
They're exactly matched. And we all know, by the way, an unenthusiastic vote and an enthusiastic vote count the same.
They shouldn't.
All right. You can look at enthusiasm for Trump approval and party ID and all sorts of stuff. But the bottom line there is that within the state, both sides are revved up. And that's what happens when Trump does all this angry stuff and stupid tweeting and picks on Obama and does everything else you can possibly think of to rile up his base. He just riles up the other base at the same time.
Okay.
So it's not a way to win. Okay, vote by type of place. Principal city includes Green Bay, Wausau, Eau Claire, not just Milwaukee and Madison, the big cities,
Okay.
and the suburbs of those around the cities.
Yes.
So it turns out, and this is not a surprise, in the principal city, those cities that I mentioned, Biden has an enormous lead.
Great.
In the suburban core, Trump has a slight lead. And that
Trump
lead
has a slight
increases the more rural you get.
Okay.
Excerpts in large towns, small towns, and isolated rural. But nothing like the enormous lead that Biden has in the principal city. And that is, in of itself, enough for a Biden 3-point lead. But that's why turnout in those cities is so important. And that's why Republicans in Wisconsin have always concentrated on voter suppression.
What a fun way to spend your day.
Okay. So, I mean, this is all confirmation of stuff we've been talking about for a long time. But here are the numbers. Here's the data. Vote by age.
Okay.
Right? 18 through 29-year-olds, that has the biggest Biden lead.
Good.
But have you found this slide? Are you following along?
Yeah. I haven't gone to this slide, but let me continue on. Vote by age. Is that where we are? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So here's the thing.
Yes.
18 to 29 is big lead for Biden. 30 to 39, slight lead for Biden.
I see.
60 to 69.
Oh, it goes the other way. Yes.
Reasonably good lead for Biden. 70 plus, even bigger lead for Biden. More confirmation that Biden is picking up the older voters. The people who are supporting Trump are basically men between the ages of 40 and 60.
They should be busy. Not.
Well, they're not right now.
Yeah, I've got to find a way to distract.
But those are the
them
ones that
from
go to
voting.
bars and then call everybody else pussies if you're not wearing a mask.
Yeah, right, true. Although, if you're at the bar, you got to take the mask off to
The
drink.
biggest supporting group for Trump by age is 50 to 59-year-olds.
Uh-oh. I
Right,
know
the ones
some
who
of them.
kind of came of age under Reagan.
Yeah, they'll be likely poisoned.
So, he's losing the older voters. He's got the younger voters. Again, obviously they have to show up in order to win. But that's what the data in Wisconsin, when you drill down, show. And that's why when you look at that data for progress, that the registered voters are more Democratic than the all adults. A surprise? Well, it's supported by drilling down to a state like Wisconsin. Oh, here's another way to put that. The national polls and the state polls are telling you the same thing.
I wish
don't
we
dismiss
had
national
started
polls.
with
It's
that,
just-
and then
it's
I wouldn't
dumb.
have.
Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make you savvy
Okay, I
because
get
2016, so nobody has to pay attention to national polls. No. It's never been true. It's certainly not true. It's a misinterpretation of what happened in 2016. And it's certainly not true in 2020. Okay?
Okay.
Done.
Oh.
Now,
Well, I'll accept that.
presidential approval. American Research Group has Trump at 40. And in the 538 average, Trump is slipping down a little bit there. But in individual states, Washington's an interesting state. Survey USA did this one.
Lots of people say so.
Because Washington was hit pretty hard by coronavirus. Biden
Yes.
57, Trump 31. That's a 26-point lead.
Oh.
And to put that in perspective, Washington also looked at Jay Inslee's race.
Yeah.
Okay, Jay Inslee's handling
That's
coronavirus fairly well, people feel,
yeah.
right? So in the Survey USA data, looking at likely voters,
Okay.
Inslee has like a 25, 27-point lead over all of his potential challengers.
That's large. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Biden has a 26-point lead over Trump in that same survey in the state of Washington. So Biden's running the same as the governor. I mean, it's just like everybody in Washington, state of Washington, have had enough with the federal response. They're done.
Yeah, I guess so. Jeez. All right. Well, good.
Right. So that's a little extra strength for Biden there. Again, Michigan Change Research, not a particularly good poll, C- rating, and they just redid the ratings, by the way. Very nice article about how that came to be and why they did the ratings, and they have a really nice discussion about polling errors. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, 538 is your place to go today.
Okay.
Michigan Change Research has Biden up by 2, which is probably why they're a C- poll.
If
Michigan is a state that Trump has a lot of trouble with. And here's a case where I'm looking and they're saying, you're telling me to look at the state polls. And looking at these state polls, they're awful. I'd rather look at the national polls. You get a much better idea what's going on.
Okay. Well, so, yeah, I guess if you're right, you don't want crap state polls.
Yeah. So why are some polls crap? Some of them wait for education. Some don't. You don't always have to. It depends upon what's going on. Other factors matter. But for the most part, you really should look at reliable polls when you get them, whenever Ann Seltzer polls, for example, whenever Charles Franklin polls in Wisconsin, and look at national polls. And so we're going to turn to one. And this national poll we're going to look at is Quinnipiac. It was out yesterday.
All right.
Former Vice President Biden leads President Trump 50-39 in a head-to-head matchup in the election for president, according to Quinnipiac University National Poll of Registered Voters released today. That's up from 49-41, although within the margin of error. Democrats go to Biden 88-5. Republicans go to Trump 87-8. Independents go to Biden 47-36. That's why independents are the group to follow. What does the 11-point Biden lead tell us? At best for Team Trump, it says voter confidence in Trump is shaky. At worst, as coronavirus cases rise, Trump's judgment is questioned. And November looms, says the Quinnipiac University polling analyst Tim Malloy. Now, the job approval rating is 42%.
Yeah.
Okay? And Trump's share of the vote is 39% compared to Biden's 50%.
All right, so there's some
Job
people who disapprove.
Doesn't automatically 1-to-1 equal who people are going to vote for.
Yes.
People know that Trump lies. A higher percentage still approve of his job performance, but that doesn't mean that translates into votes. Now, even if it does, 42% isn't going to win it for you.
Yeah.
All right. And so the conventional wisdom is, well, if Trump is running 42% job approval, that means that more people will vote for him when it comes closer to November, because you always have this rally effect. Well, he hasn't demonstrated he's capable of a rally effect.
True.
What if 42 is what he's going to get and no better? And what if he even does worse than that? Again, we're seeing reversals in the usual thinking about what's the difference between a registered voter and all adults. What's the difference between job approval and actual votes? We don't know that Trump's job approval is going to turn into votes. In fact, it may not. Instead of just assuming he's going to have a rally effect that he's not been able to demonstrate in the midst of a big crisis, what if it goes the other way? What if he actually does worse than his job approval?
I guess.
And his job approval isn't that good to begin with. That's how you get numbers like Biden up by 11.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
and that's what national polls can tell you. That's why I get so frustrated when people say, well, I don't care about national polls. 2016, but our emails. Yeah. It's not 2016. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Well, I guess the good thing about people who insist that they won't trust national polls is they're going to have to follow the only other option is to look at state polls, and there are so many. Or
look at nothing and just get motivated and vote. That's fine. I don't care. That's good. You do what you want, but don't tell everybody else not to pay attention.
They won't have time.
Just don't pay attention to yourself and shut up.
I guess. Yeah. Well, that'll save you a lot of effort. Anyway, if you're really paying attention to 50 states worth of polling, you won't have time to tell me that you don't like national polls.
That's like telling somebody like us, don't pay attention to politics.
Yes, that won't work.
Okay,
That's
fine.
true. I have
Thank
tried
you for
that.
your opinion.
True. Free country, right? You can tell
Free
me through your
country. I
mask.
think I will pay attention to politics, even though you told me not to. How about
I
that?
think I
What are you going
woke
to do
up
with
in a
that?
free country. Yeah. That's it. That's all there is to it. Just like voting with our feet. The state's open, but I don't care. Okay, there's only so much you can do.
Now, let's dig a little more, and this will take us to the end of the hour. In the Quinnipiac poll, voters are split on who they think would do a better job handling the economy, with 48% saying Biden and 47% saying Trump. That's on the economy. That's a strong point.
Yes. And they're wrong.
In April, Trump led Biden
all.
on the question 49-44. You're seeing a shift, slow though it is,
Yes.
on how people think Trump is handling the economy.
Yeah. Well, that's it.
Now,
It's pretty interesting. How do you think it needs to be opened and he's doing a good job? I don't know.
voters also say 57-37 that Biden would do a better job than Trump handling healthcare.
Yes. Good.
Biden outscores Trump on honesty, good leadership skills, and caring about average American voters. Biden's honest, 47-41. Trump is not honest, 62-34. Biden's good leadership skills, 51-40. Trump does not, 58-40. Biden cares about average Americans, 61-30, while Trump does not, 56-42. That's what's underlying a lot of this. People realize that Trump isn't to be trusted. And despite everything that he's tried to throw at Biden, it's not sticking.
Yeah.
People were inclined, predisposed, if you will, to mistrust Hillary Clinton for a variety of reasons. You can cite the mighty Wurlitzer, the right-wing, vast right-wing conspiracy, the noise machine, Fox News, whatever you want to do, 20, 30 years of vilifying the Clintons. You can do that. You can attribute it to sexism. You can attribute it to the fact that Clinton was actually a really smart, competent woman. And therefore claims that she was the head of a conspiracy to do this, that, or anything else. Had some sailors because, she's really smart.
Oh, she could do that. Yes. Okay, I see.
Right?
I don't like that one, but it's possible.
Tough to make that case about Biden.
Yeah.
Biden's the evil genius that's behind it. What? We're talking about Joe Biden here.
Yeah. Well, they did it once on Saturday Night Live with Reagan.
Exactly. And it was so funny because it was so opposite to the prevailing wisdom about who Reagan was. And in fact, in real life, absolutely true.
All right.
Reagan was nothing like that. You can't make those things stick against Biden. That's not what his strengths are. His strengths are honest leadership and caring about Americans. In other words, he's compassionate. He's like a human being. He's normal. And everything that tries to attack him on that is not going to stick with the public because he's a known quantity for those things. He can be attacked on other things, his policy, his adeptness to change, his rapid response, all sorts of stuff. But not those core things.
No, some people interpret them.
It's one of those things that everybody knows. Everybody knows Biden is honest. Everybody knows Trump isn't.
Yes. Well,
you're not going to change that in 6 months between now and the election, no matter what kind of commercials you throw up, no matter what you put on Facebook.
What if we're all dead? Then it won't matter.
Well, then it won't matter.
What's the polling say then?
Well, coronavirus response by a 16-point margin, 55-39. Voters think Biden would do a better job than Trump handling the response to the virus.
It's hard not to.
Right?
Yeah.
2/3 of voters say that President Trump should wear a face mask when he's out in public, and 27% say he shouldn't. So every appearance, like today in Michigan, where he goes to a Ford factory that's been converted to ventilators, and Ford backed down and said they're not going to make him wear a mask, although everybody else has to. But 2/3 of voters say no, he should wear a mask. He should show some leadership here. There's a reason why the vice president had to back down when he wasn't wearing masks when he was supposed to at the Mayo Clinic. That's what the public wants. 2/3 of the public are wearing masks themselves. They want their leaders to do the same thing. Yes, the 1/3 can be very angry and volatile and loud about it, but that's not what majority opinion is.
Yeah. It is interesting, though, to note that it didn't trying to make the same play for Pence just didn't work. I mean, we've noted that a number of times. He just doesn't have the same whatever it is going on. The je ne sais quoi, as they might say in, let's say, Quebec, as opposed to France. But Yeah, it doesn't work for him. The Ford plant thing is kind of amazing, though. He keeps going to places where it's absolutely essential that the workforce not get sick, and he won't wear a mask.
Yeah, Ford just had to close 2 plants because
Is that right?
they had coronavirus in the plants.
Yeah, so you don't want that to happen to
And then there was another
one.
report about a meatpacking plant where a quarter of the folks there have the virus. These are still dangerous places, and it's turning out that being outside on the beach isn't nearly as dangerous as being on the subway or at a meatpacking plant or
that's always
places where people gather together. Folks understand this, and that's why in this very significant number from the Quinnipiac poll back to school, half the voters don't feel it's safe to send students of any age back to school in the fall.
Yeah, and yet we're going to need to do that.
But everybody should open up. And, we need a plan for that. And when things like that start to hit, that's when voters are going to make up their mind and say, you know what, you haven't helped me. I am not rewarding you with my vote for something you haven't helped me with. In fact, you've made things way worse by not doing anything about it.
All right.
So that's why some of this stuff is a lag time between what you do and then how people react to it.
Yeah. All right. Well,
let alone the economic numbers. We'll get to that, in time, not for this show, but in time. You start to see the June numbers and how it really impacts and whether or not opening up really helps your state, like in Wisconsin. These are all just terrible numbers for Donald Trump. It's really understandable to say that, sure, he has a path for victory, but you're looking at this, everything I presented today, and it's like, but it's a really narrow path.
Yes, well.
One foot in front of the other, you can't afford to do anything except walk a tightrope.
Yeah, Trump's not the kind of guy who can fit on narrow paths.
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, okay. Well,
because I'm pretty confident he'll make things worse for himself.
I'm pretty sure it has to happen. I guess that's why he's invested in predicting such amazing things for the economy in the next quarter. I think he wants his guys to predict 20, 25, 30% growth in the next quarter.
So he's going to push people to manipulate numbers now. So nobody's going to believe him.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. Good wrap up. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, time now to take responsibility for the focus of the show, I guess. Back upon myself. Thanks, Greg, for doing an hour of the show. I really should. I would sleep in, except then I'd miss this interesting show. So I appreciate it. As always, we'll see you again on Monday when, most of what we have learned will have gone to hell by then, but maybe there'll be some new data we can parse at that point, and something even dumber than we ever imagined possible will have been said by the president, and we'll have to interpret it. Speaking of dumb things that the president has said, I hinted at it this morning. Miriam Elder, who writes for BuzzFeed and covers the Trump 2020 campaign, has this interesting tweet and interesting piece accompanying it. Michigan's Secretary of State, she says, tells me that Trump's tweets this morning, would have been yesterday morning, on vote by mail, where he was saying, Michigan is very illegally sending out absentee ballots to every voter, which is totally wrong and a huge fraud. And of course, they weren't actually doing that, but he was saying it anyway. These tweets this morning on vote by mail were misinformation on the level of foreign adversaries and bad actors. Miriam Elder is passing it on because it's a hell of a statement, but it's not the full truth about what's going on, which is that, the reason it's on the level of foreign adversaries and bad actors is that Donald Trump, alleged to be president of the United States, is a foreign adversary and a bad actor. It's a water is wet headline, but I don't want to dismiss it because that's just rude and some people still need to hear it. Here's the way it's actually expressed in the piece. Always, I think, we find usually more disappointing than the fun tweet. But headline, similar but not as strong. Trump's attack on vote-by-mail plans in key 2020 states is, quote, misinformation, a top state official says. Well, sure, of course it's misinformation. It's completely wrong. We understand that. What happened to the foreign adversary bad actors thing? It might be in there, but why isn't it in the headline? I don't know. Is that Miriam Elder's fault? Probably not. Subheader says, there is so much misinformation in those tweets, I don't know how to weigh any of it other than simply just cut through and speak the truth, Michigan's Secretary of State said. Still not the gut punch we were looking for. Local and federal officials pushed back Wednesday against a barrage of tweets from President Donald Trump, allegedly President Donald Trump, that appeared to lay the groundwork for alleging voter fraud against ahead of November's elections, with Michigan's Secretary of State accusing the president of contributing to a wave of political, quote, misinformation. By the way, Twitter safety and standards I guess, disagrees that this is anything like that and they don't need to do anything about it. He's allowed to tweet that because he's the guy that we say is president. And it can't be the case that he's a foreign adversary or a bad actor because America. And they're afraid, what it is, of course, they're afraid of right-wing backlash if they do something about it. So they won't. As the coronavirus death toll in the U.S. neared 100,000, and yes, by the way, checking in with the Worldometer, we did flip over the numbers to 95,000 reported dead so far, and on the verge of our another click on the total cases. We're going to clear 1.6 million cases worldwide. We topped 5 million yesterday, and then we added 100,000 to that. That's also the big news. World Health Organization expressing their concern over the accumulation of over 100,000 new confirmed cases in a single day. So things beginning to move, exponentially, I guess, in that category. Though most of the growth is happening elsewhere. Just since we're on the subject and we've departed from it, other things that are happening, other milestones to note for the day. The UK now becomes the 5th nation in the world to top 250,000 cases. I mentioned the other day, now still racing up the charts, Russia topping 300,000 sometime in the previous day or so. Brazil poised to clear 300,000 cases and become the 3rd such country in the world. Brazil having rocketed past Spain, UK, and Italy in the last couple of days. I had tweeted the other day that I think Brazil may end up swamping us all in this, as they're posting the largest growth in numbers of cases per day of pretty much anyone in the world. And that combination of that and the country's poverty versus the United States and certain European states where we have the resources to try to clamp down on it. So I think they're going to end up swamping us. The Brazilians were not happy. One Brazilian was not happy to hear that and expressed as much on Twitter. Anyway, rapid growth there. Peru also becoming the 12th country in the world to top 100,000 cases, to move into the 6-figure club, and everybody else is lingering behind. The next on the list is China, which has been lingering in the 82,000 number area for this entire stretch, which leads you to believe either that they're not reporting their numbers correctly or that their lockdown is so heavy-handed and authoritarian, or some combination of both, that they're just not posting any new numbers. Canada occupies the number 14 spot. They're creeping up slowly too, and I imagine there's no way of avoiding infection given what we've got going on in our country. Anyway, jumping back to what Miriam Elder had to report, as the coronavirus death toll in the U.S. nears 100,000, Trump spent the morning tweeting error-filled missives, it's lies, directed at Michigan and Nevada. The states have launched initiatives to inform voters about their ability to vote by mail amid fears the pandemic could make in-person voting unsafe. And again, that's all that they did. They told everybody, you can get an absentee ballot. Here's an application to do so and instructions for how to fill it out. And that's all there is to it. But he decided that was a huge illegality and a political crime on the level of Watergate, et cetera, et cetera. Not quite Obamagate, but So he lied about it and told everybody that they had sent everybody ballots instead, which of course is not true, as neither party has made a nomination yet, for one thing. And even if they had, look, the fact is they haven't sent those. Don't lie and say they did. Trump first targeted Michigan, where he has been engaged in a public battle with Gretchen Whitmer, the state's governor, and a potential vice presidential pick for his likely election rival, Joe Biden. Trump accused the state of improperly sending absentee ballots to 7.7 million people, and hours later corrected it, and I would have put that in scare quotes, corrected it to read that the state had sent out applications for those ballots. That part's true. He said the move was done, quote, illegally and without authorization by a rogue Secretary of State. That part is not true. And said he would seek to hold funding for Michigan if, I should have said withhold funding for Michigan, quote, if they want to go down this voter fraud path. He later targeted Nevada, alleging it was creating, quote, a great voter fraud scenario. He keeps capitalizing both V and F, voter and fraud, in these tweets for some reason. It's just one of those things he does. Trump added, you must not cheat in elections, which is, of course, projection of the highest order. Several states, in line with local and federal regulations, have been encouraging mail-in ballots in a bid to avoid large gatherings as the coronavirus pandemic continues. Social gatherings pose a threat to voters and workers at poll sites who often come from the most at-risk groups. In Wisconsin, health officials said at least 52 people who voted in person or worked at the polls during the state's primary last month had gotten COVID-19, though it remains unclear if there is a direct link to voting day. I guess you can never nail it down for sure. Trump's tweets came one day after Jocelyn Benson, Michigan's Secretary of State, announced that the state's voters would be mailed applications to request an absentee ballot so that no Michigander has to choose between their health and their right to vote. The state is due to hold a primary in August before the general election in November. More than 5,000 people in the state have died from COVID-19. Benson told BuzzFeed News she was concerned Trump's tweets could work to undermine voters' faith in the election. We know the important role that Michigan has this year on many levels with many races, she said. Because of that, we're prepared for multiple sources of efforts to misinform our voters. From foreign adversaries, bad actors, partisan actors. I didn't wake up this morning thinking I'd have to push back about efforts to misinform our voters about this particular issue coming from the White House, but that's indeed what we had to do, and we'll continue to do that in light of anyone from any party, from any source, that will in any way use a platform to misinform our voters about their rights. All right. Thinking back here, I knew that there was something I was reading along the way that made me think, oh, I know what I want to jump to next. And now I can't remember what it was, but let's see. All I have in my head here, well, there's nothing in my head, but all I have was this idea that, oh, yeah, that reminded me I wanted to find a tweet that I retweeted and scroll through the timeline in order to find it. What was it? But I think it had to do with his accusations about the ballots being sent out, or the applications even, still accusing people, even the applications, he said, was done illegally, which it wasn't, but, well, I had something specific in mind, and maybe scrolling through the Twitter feed later on will help us out here. All right, where do we leave off? Do we need any more out of this article? It goes on for some time, but I think we get the idea. Of course, there was, yes, Trump has loudly disparaged voting by mail, a method that could increase voter turnout in what is likely to be a hotly contested election. He tweeted about it last month, alleging that it carried tremendous potential for voter fraud, which he didn't capitalize that time, and for whatever reason doesn't work out well for Republicans, even though there's no evidence the method promotes widespread fraud. Later pressed at a briefing, yes, now I remember, later pressed at a briefing on why it was all right for him to vote by absentee ballot in the primary in Florida, where he's registered. Trump presented an evidence-free theory that the process for in-state and out-of-state absentee ballots is different, which is ludicrous. And, I mean, I couldn't even extrapolate a theory for you about why asking for an absentee ballot from a state that you are not currently in, but where you're registered, is fair and on the up and up, but asking for an absentee ballot from inside that state is somehow rife with fraud. And I guess it just comes from well, if you're in the state, then why don't you just vote on that day, which is to ignore that, many states are large and of various other reasons. Even if you're on one end of the state, but you're registered to vote on the other end of the state, you should get an absentee ballot. Or if you are in the town where you vote even at home, but you are ill or afraid to get ill, you should be able to get an absentee ballot for that too. He just was saying, well, that's different because I did it. And he was too embarrassed to say that. So he said some nonsense about it being in-state, out-of-state. Now it reminds me that of what I wanted to say. The point being where, at the point in the story that we were just reading, where Trump says he's considering withholding funding from Michigan, and I guess other states now too. It was pretty interesting. I guess they put this question to whatever the name of the current idiot who's the White House press secretary is. I got Kayleigh. What was it? I don't even remember. I've stopped registering their names separately at this point. But there was a question put to her about this threat to withhold funds. Now, because she didn't want to answer the question, because it's an impeachable offense to withhold federal funds over something like this. Because she didn't want to answer the question, and because it involved voting, she came up with the idea that she would be able to dodge the question entirely if she said, well, that's a campaign issue, and you'll have to talk to the campaign spokesperson about that. Now, of course, I believe she's the former campaign spokesperson herself, but it would be proper for her ordinarily to recognize this new role and not answer. Here's the exchange. Maggie Haberman for the Times asking the question. I don't know if she asked the question, but reporting the answer. The press secretary who did a polling presentation for Republican senators yesterday, which of course would be a campaign function, right? And she did that for Republican senators yesterday. But okay, now she's acting in her capacity as White House press secretary and speaking in the White House at a non-political meeting. They asked her afterwards. For instance, Maggie reports here, when I asked some folks why the press secretary did this presentation, the polling presentation, which is also political, even as she's dodging this question because she says it's too political, the answer was that she had just come from the campaign. So, in order to have the campaign present campaign information to Republican senators, as will happen, they just try not to do those things on the grounds of the Capitol. They make them come to the Capitol Hill Club, the Republican club, to do those things. Although I don't know that they did that. I think they might have done it right there on Capitol Hill at the luncheon. But anyway, it's illegal, but who's going to enforce anything, right? So if it were a Democrat, it'd be impeachable, but it's Donald Trump, so we don't do anything because it's lost in the sea of outrage. So the press secretary did this polling presentation for Republican senators yesterday, and she now declines to answer a question related to what the president tweeted about absentee ballots because she says, well, that's a campaign question. And so properly, at the moment, I'm going to just simply follow the rules because it's helpful for me to follow the rules. Whereas yesterday I didn't follow the rules because that would have been an inconvenience. So, but that struck me, and it didn't get a comment, I thought, that the press secretary was saying, I won't answer that question about what the president meant about absentee balloting in Michigan and withholding funds from them because it involves the absentee ballots, which means it's a campaign question and I shouldn't answer it. But the real underlying question and the real underlying takeaway, I would say, from all this is the press secretary just admitted to you that the president was planning to withhold federal funds from Michigan over a campaign issue, which is a direct parallel to the Ukraine problem, that he was going to use federal funds to leverage a political campaign end that he wanted. And I don't know whether Republicans considered that within bounds because he was leveraging it out of a foreign country and therefore not, employing American domestic actors to leverage this thing out. But here we are seeing it. It's in Michigan. If you send out ballots to people so that they can vote and therefore, in my opinion, his opinion, hurt the Republican Party and the Trump campaign in particular, then you won't get federal dollars that you're either entitled to or should go to you by right under another administration, or if we don't want to say by right or by entitlement, that it would be illegal for you to otherwise block for purely political considerations. The White House press secretary said it was a political consideration. That's why I'm not answering the question, because it's so political and so campaign related in nature. If it's that campaign related in nature for you, it is certainly also that campaign related for the president, and it would be, again, another impeachable offense, but who cares? I mean, they might as well admit to impeachable offenses at this point and simply say, yes, it's impeachable, but we see what comes of impeachment, so fine. You want to call it impeachable, call it impeachable. It doesn't matter. We're still here. You're not removing us from office. I thought that was an important point, not given much attention yesterday, and one I wanted to make today. All right, we'll stop with Miriam Elder's reporting here, unless, I think we're almost at the end of the article. Quick scan tells me, nothing in addition. There's a lot of verbiage here, so I should have had a minimum word count that they were looking for. Moving on. Some of it is good explanation. What other things did we put together here? Yes, all right, let's see. A couple of interesting essays out there in addition to E.J. Dionne's. I thought maybe just for fun we'll throw in Dahlia Lithwick's entry for Slate, pretty much along the same lines. Slightly different track, though. The president still has no clothes, which is not a pleasant thing to think about. Dahlia has help from William Sage on this one. The coronavirus, they say, has made Trump's deficiencies more apparent. We still don't quite know what to do with him. That's largely true. Let's hear how she puts it. Expressing his skepticism about the utility of widespread coronavirus testing, President Donald Trump recently said, when you test, you find something is wrong with people. Yeah, I mean, you would find it if you were testing lions, too, but we're not. We're interested in people. We may never have the tests to determine exactly what is wrong with Trump himself, but, well, we do. Mental capacity tests and whatever, various others, diagnostic tools. But we know that something is wrong, and we have known this for a long time. We know that he fails to exhibit emotional qualities we reasonably expect of a leader, particularly in times of crisis. Most notably, he fails to have empathy for, or at a minimum awareness of, human illness, suffering, and death. We also know something is wrong because we have heard, seen, and read statements by the president that are inconsistent, factually incorrect, tangential, and more than occasionally, incoherent. Depending on the topic and setting, these behaviors range from intermittent to continual. Years have been wasted in an intramural debate among mental health experts over whether to diagnose the president remotely and what such a diagnosis might be. But that, too, is a distraction from what is directly in front of our eyes, although I hate being told that anything is a distraction. I'm rather sick of it. That reminded me somewhere along the line. Let's see, what were we looking? Oh, yes, right. A statement I saw discussed on Twitter this morning. I don't know what the context of it was, but just sort of an offhand remark that he made, and I don't know whether he just, blew the remark or what, or just doesn't understand anything. As somebody pointed this one out. Who's got this one? Nico XW1, if you want to try and find him on Twitter, NICO, Nico XW1, tweeting out this Washington Post video clip in which he quotes Trump as saying, "When you say per capita, there's many per capitas. Is this like per capita relative to what?" And then asking, how did this guy make it through elementary school? Because, of course, per capita is a relative measure. Relative to what? Relative to nothing. It is what it is. But per capita, of course, is so that you can compare across populations per person, so that you can be talking about the numbers on the same basis. But he thinks that there's many different kinds of per capita, but there are not. And he's an extraordinarily dumb guy, and too dumb to be president, basically. That's kind of where we're landing here. All right, so moving on with Dahlia's thoughts here. There is, even as the president blurs the line between reality and fantasy while talking about a lethal pandemic, a tendency to puzzle over the president's actions, to wonder if they are somehow part of a complex political strategy. E.J. Dionne says no, and so do the rest of us. Is the president's behavior genius, as a recent Washington Post commentary chose to call it, while still labeling it irrational? Who's doing that, by the way? Just see if we can check in. Do we talk about this? Michael Gerson, a much maligned article yesterday. Trump's unhinged tweets are an attempt to divert attention away from a historic fiasco, which feels correct, but I guess at some point the debate arises. Well, is he saying, I need to distract from this fiasco, so I'll blurt out something, I can distract people with this thing, which is a thought that might enter his head. The problem is, you're supposed to, for instance, you're supposed to distract people with things that are less damaging to you than the thing you're trying to distract from. And arguably everything's less damaging than letting 100,000 Americans die in a pandemic that was totally preventable. But the thing is, part of the plan, ordinarily you would say to the person, all right, sir, your plan to confess to plundering Fort Knox and murdering millions with your bare hands is not a great, it is a distraction. It will work, but it will only get you in more trouble. And he doesn't go quite that far with his various distractions. But one of the problems with thinking of it as genius is that very often the things he chooses, or the things that happen to come out of his mouth that end up distracting us, whether it's a conscious choice or not, are very often worse than the things he's distracting us from. And it's ironic, given that he's, spending his time saying, well, we can't have the cure be worse than the disease. Well, we can't have the distraction be worse than that which you are trying to distract us from, and yet you do that every day. So I'm not sure you're really grasping any of this. Okay. Where were we? Yes, a simpler explanation, Dahlia and... who was it? Dahlia and William go on to say. A simpler explanation is that both his distracting tweet storms and incompetent leadership arise from the same underlying cause, even if we cannot label it, and the correct descriptor is not brilliant. But despite years of largely uninformed incoherence, it's still difficult for many of us to resist the temptation to find order in the mess. That's part of a working human brain. You try to find order in a mess, even if it doesn't exist. In the absence of psychiatric or cognitive tests Trumps may never undergo, that sort of testing we're very bad at. Our numbers are very low on that. We cannot establish that some affirmative condition accounts for his daily shortage of rational output. This leaves us in the uncomfortable position of having to document only what Trump lacks. And while proving a nullity seems impossible, the truth is that one doesn't need a PhD in clinical psychology to observe and record the ordinary human behaviors the president hasn't mastered. Any rational observer can do it. The burning question is why we don't. That is well put. Anyone and everyone charged with reporting on this president should make a fundamental commitment that describing or interpreting this president's statements and actions must highlight, that what everyone who's responsible for these statements and actions, reporting them, what they all must highlight on an ongoing and even repetitive basis is what they don't see. Okay, we kind of bungled that, but we'll be back to try and clean it up after this short break. What else can we cram in here? Reporters, public intellectuals, and pundits should stop filling in Trump's gaps for him, and we should allow as full a picture as possible to emerge of his cognitive and personal incompleteness. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. I have a million other topics that I should move on to, but I always have a good time reading stories like this one to see whether I really feel like they hit the nail on the head or missed by that much. I liked the sentence we just ran with into the break, and I probably didn't do it justice, but let's move on. Or maybe I do need to recap it so that we can figure out this next sentence as I look at it. Reporters, public intellectuals, and pundits should stop filling in Trump's gaps for him and should allow as full a picture as possible to emerge of his cognitive and personal incompleteness. I guess that's why we all enjoy seeing the verbatim transcripts or listening to the tape of what it sounds like when he speaks. Not doing so explicitly has resulted in 4 years of rationalizing, contextualizing, and indeed, in popular parlance, normalizing a president few of us would trust to take care of a pet over the weekend. I like that. Why does our public commentary about Donald Trump's words and deeds so seldom start or finish with the honest observation, familiar from fairy tales, that he isn't wearing any clothes? His unwillingness, this unwillingness, to mention the nakedness of his character, the absence of what is practically and morally required of presidents, becomes an act of draping layers of cloth over an unadorned and oblivious leader. And why do journalists and pundits keep doing this? The primary reason must be that news and its consumers and producers abhor a vacuum. Reporters and commentators are routinely tempted to supplement what Trump says or imply that there is more to what he says than is in evidence, when instead the absence of factual support is the essential insight. The mind's eye routinely fills missing details in what we see in order to generate familiar or desired images, and it seems that covering for this president has magnified this human tendency. I was going to say, I think it kind of works in both directions, right? We see he says something stupid, and if we want mentally to complete the picture of his stupidity, we enhance it and say what it means and why it's dumb on 15 levels. So I guess we're sort of guilty of a similar infraction, but with different intent in mind, and we would argue getting a clearer picture of just how stupid he is versus trying to turn him into a coherent person by enhancing what he has said on the record. So I wouldn't exactly both sides it, but I would point out that, we do spend a lot of time pointing out the many levels on which he's wrong, and I'm not sure whether that contributes to the problem or not. Some problems derive from the workflow of conventional reporting, particularly the soundbite nature of television news. It feels necessary to present Trump's words in short bursts, which usually renders them more intelligible, while editing out the surrounding incoherence. It took a foreign correspondent from Australia listening in 2017 to the president struggling to describe his proposed border wall to realize how much routine editing in daily news coverage tended to normalize the content and cadence of Trump's speech. It is also common among media outlets to reproduce parts of Trump's answers to media questions, particularly when he sounds combative, which is often, without also representing the question. So audiences don't see Trump's frequent inability to grasp what is being asked, not to be confused with rationally refusing to answer, and his tendency to offer non-responsive musings for which no semblance of a larger context exists. That's clearly true, too. By the way, some of the best work in exposing exactly what he's about has also come from non-journalists, but rather from comedians who either have in the past, one of my favorite tricks, right, slowing down the speech by 50%, but raising the pitch back so that it sounds like his voice, so that he sounds like a slurring drunk, which is about where his, cognition level is. And so it makes the point without altering the content, but changing the context. But also we're all enjoying, somebody has become an internet sensation, taking his comments verbatim, in fact, taking the tape unaltered, and mouthing, lip syncing the words, but then adding visual commentary to it, but really letting the words do the most of the talking. I can't remember the name of the woman who's become an internet sensation doing these things. Although, quite honestly, I thought the very best of those combined the two approaches. There was one woman who briefly hit it big with one such interpretation. This other woman I'm thinking of has done, half a dozen of these and is turning them out daily. But one woman who did them did it as a person, like at a club with a drink in their hand, and did a fantastic job making the point both that the comments were incoherent and sounded like a slurring drunk without having to even slow them down 50%. I thought that one was brilliant. Anyway, let's see. There was the next comment, which is that sometimes showing brief clips makes it look like the president is more normal, and it makes him look more normal when you don't bother telling anybody what the question was, so no one can tell just how out of context his stupid comments are. Both indicia of Trump's irrationality were harder to conceal during the hour-long solo Q&As after the White House coronavirus briefings that received wire-to-wire live coverage. True. The president relished these exchanges, but the sessions made it amply clear that Trump neither heard nor understood simple press questions, a fact that is not new but had been airbrushed out of years of daily reporting. The sheer volume of Trump's Twitter activity presents a related problem. Individual statements are often deemed newsworthy, reported, and then discussed, but public attention is only occasionally drawn to the abnormality of Trump's overall output, including his frequent tweeting at unusual hours in the late night or early morning. After 3 years, moreover, even his most outrageous messages attract only fleeting notice. This past week, he tweeted approvingly of a mob threatening a journalist at an anti-lockdown protest and accused a former congressman of murder. That would be Joe Scarborough, which people have done it before. Because many reporters following Trump on social media have decided to regard his tweet storms as performative rather than unhinged. I guess that's supposed to be the explanation for why it's ignored. What did I see last? Oh, yeah, somebody was pointing. He tweets some unusual things, to be sure, especially late at night. The one that happened to catch my eye last night was him again, past midnight, just approvingly retweeting something that praised him mildly and in passing, but that had been tweeted out like 2 years ago. So that even searching your own name, if you're President Trump, if you search your own name, you're not going to find a 2-year-old quote. It's just interesting. Somebody must have fed that thing to him, and it was very odd. And it wasn't even particularly good. It was just, so there was really a baffling situation. What is going on here? There's just nothing worth retweeting here. And how did he even find this thing? And it worries you. It has taken years for some members of the mainstream press to note explicitly in headlines that Trump utters false statements. For most of Trump's demonstrably untrue pronouncements, reporters typically work out contradictory factual information in the story, not the headline. But the current national crisis has underscored how insufficient this strategy is. There can be grave consequences from relying on readers to identify presidential misinformation through lengthy he says, she says reportage. COVID-19 has brought Trump's irrationality and incoherence into clearer focus, but it will take energy and commitment among both media sources and their audiences to continually center that fact. Typically, reporting as breaking news, an impromptu presidential statement on a topic of unquestioned public importance, such as the projected number of pandemic-related deaths or the expected timetable for vaccine production and distribution, assumes a centuries-long but suddenly contestable predicate that presidents try to be truthful and their version of knowable facts is newsworthy. Trump, however, has uttered approximately 20,000 false or misleading statements in taking office, a substantial number of which have been traced to random Fox News hosts or fringe conservative websites. Early COVID-19 coverage repeatedly ignored these prior probabilities. When Trump offered a specific number on a certain date or announced a supposedly miraculous scientific breakthrough, media reports showcasing those statements implied, perhaps unintentionally, that his saying meant knowing. We brief presidents and give them insight to confidential and classified information, and therefore, we're used to the idea that something that sounds fantastical or that you can't produce the proof for might actually be true. And he's exploiting that, to be sure. I would add to all of this coverage here. More recent coverage, however, takes account of Trump's declared intent, which is that regardless of the risks, he would like to make America once again a nation of salespeople and shoppers, and finally regards his rosy declarations that fly in the face of widespread illness and death with skepticism. When the president claimed to be taking an unproven anti-malaria drug to prevent COVID infection, even some Fox News pundits acknowledged that this was uninformed, dangerous behavior. And we say might not even be true. To be sure, the cure for media credulousness is better media. Journalists who once believed that presidential announcements reflected special knowledge have learned via detailed reporting that Trump refuses to receive or understand nuanced information about the pandemic. This saves us a reading of another long-form article in the New York Times. The one I'm thinking of, you may have seen, headlined, "For Spy Agencies, Briefing Trump is a Test of Holding His Attention." Essentially, a news article aimed at explaining to you that Trump is too dumb to be president. President Trump's intelligence briefings have gotten renewed attention since he blamed them for failing to sound the alarm early on about the coronavirus. But this is a persistent problem we've heard about for a long time. People who brief him know he's not paying attention, doesn't take anything out of them, and doesn't want to listen. And so, therefore, one, can't be warned about anything, and so, therefore, can't do anything in anticipation of dangers. But two, like Dahlia is saying here, the premise of accepting presidential pronouncements as informed and therefore newsworthy is obviated. So that working assumption, that excuse that we use to normalize him by saying the things that he says are newsworthy and ought to be accepted as at least possibly true on face value is missing. He's not more informed than the average person. He's less informed than the average person. So therefore, the things he said should get less attention than those things that the average person might say. All right, but it's not going to work that way. We know there's just too much apparatus around the presidency to allow it to happen that way. The original White House plan on the pandemic contemplated daily meetings of the president's coronavirus task force to be followed by public briefings. Trump, however, stopped attending the task force meetings. Then he stopped inviting experts to speak at the briefings. The nation repeatedly saw Trump walk to the podium, read a short, seemingly unfamiliar script in a flat monotone, and then wing it for an hour or more of questions from the press. Since those faux briefings ceased, Trump has repeatedly demonstrated contempt even for medical expertise from within his own administration. And so, many news outlets no longer present Trump's medical statements verbatim in close to real time. Perhaps COVID-19, as part of its human devastation, has finally laid bare more of the president's cognitive black holes. COVID-19 has done less to break another journalistic habit that conceals Trump's vacuity, conflating impulse with strategy. This is where I thought we were going originally. The other stuff has just been good supplemental material. Why does media coverage rush to supply rational motives that may not exist? Because the demands of continuous media attention require storytelling, and the power of narrative lies in laying out motivation and conflict. A leader's expected focus in this pandemic, which would be ordinarily to build common purpose, save lives, and restore confidence in economic activity, does not motivate Trump. So, reporters and commentators assume that something equally significant must be motivating him instead, like campaign strategy. Accordingly, Trump's endless chaotic disputes and frequent outbursts are routinely described as intentional distractions from his own incompetence or malfeasance, as dog whistles to rally his base, or as veiled signals to members of his own administration. I guess this helps explain why QAnon people think everything is a signal to them. They're insane. That explains it, right? Well, I don't know. Pundits and journalists are supposedly sane, so what explains it for them? I don't know. The better explanation is that he's just talking on impulse. And that's a great way of putting it there with the comma in there. Not that he's just talking on impulse, but that he's just talking. And that he's talking on impulse. Not an impulse to say anything in particular, but rather my nervous system's impulse is to jabber. That's all I'm doing. I'm making noise. For a reason to distract? No, it's just a nervous habit. I talk when I'm stuck in front of a camera. And I love putting myself in front of cameras. Anyway, certainly Trump has a pervasive sense of self-interest, whether reflected in power, adulation, or immunity from criticism. But the frequency and character of his attacks suggest they are the consequences of poor impulse control more than any deep strategy. They evidence Trump's own distraction. They need not have the purpose and should not have the effect of distracting others. COVID coverage has been increasingly cynical in the motives it supplies for Trump's impulses, such as Chris Cuomo's interpretation of Trump's use of hydroxychloroquine to make Republicans seem braver than Democrats. But it has not reduced the media's basic attribution error. There is no grand strategy here. Finally, COVID coverage intensifies the mystery of the elephant in the room. If the President of the United States is not a rational actor, how can we expect rational action? You can't. The pandemic may have reduced journalistic tendencies to paper over daily examples of Trump's missing pieces, but news coverage continues to excuse itself from connecting the dots of Trump's episodic irrationality into a larger demonstration of incapacity. Scattered lay commentary suggests that a crisis of the magnitude facing America has caused a mental or emotional collapse on the president's part, but few, if any, lines are traced to the persistent irrationality of Trump's entire presidency. This continues to be the case even though pandemic coverage has featured a near-continuous parade of physicians, epidemiologists, and other scientific experts willing to opine on countless other matters of health and medicine. Many of these experienced, informed clinicians have talked about Trump's penchant for offering, with supreme self-confidence, potentially lethal guidance to the public regarding COVID-19 countermeasures. His touting of hydroxychloroquine, his prediction that the virus would disappear like a miracle, his musings about internal administration of bleach and light, his dismissiveness regarding testing and contact tracing. They have not hesitated to criticize and even countermand Trump's specific health recommendations, but they refuse to apply that same expertise to explain why anyone would repeatedly concoct, and apparently believe, such utterly bizarre medical advice. It seems that an arguably outdated, likely irrelevant professional taboo on mental health diagnosis has overshadowed and ironically nearly obscured the pathology of this presidency. Still, no psychiatric diagnosis is needed to assess the president, just more explicit acknowledgement of the causal possibilities and their associated risks. If a sixth grader can look at Trump's behavior and conclude that he's emotionally challenged, unmoored from facts, and unable to speak the truth, why are informed, trained adults barred from saying the same thing? Imagine dozens of medical experts watching Trump, an overweight man in advanced middle age, repeatedly struggling to climb flights of stairs in his various journeys. Imagine that he pants and wheezes, breaks into a cold sweat, clutches at his chest, and often stops to regroup, unable to proceed. Imagine. Few clinicians would hesitate to suggest that, for both his benefit and the nation's, a cardiac evaluation might be indicated. With respect to Trump's persistent irrationality regarding COVID-19, only a handful of medical authorities have dared do so on broadcast television. Ultimately, Trump's deficiencies are our problem to deal with. The gaps, the absences, the holes in the commentary on this presidency map perfectly onto the empty spaces within the president himself. There are many explanations for our collective blinders, long-standing expectations of presidents, respect for wealth, receptivity to salesmanship, partisan division, financial opportunism, media echo chambers, foreign interests, aggressive lawyers, non-disclosure agreements. Still, we must find ways to report on his increasingly dangerous irrationality, and we must do so without inadvertently rationalizing it. In order to understand it, we have to stop trying to make sense of it. All right. Reached the right conclusion. I thought that was actually well worth the time, in my view. I don't know. It wasn't news, but it was worth our effort. Okay. Let's see. Other things. Now we'll have to do it sort of like lightning round to get to the other things. One, will alert you to the headline of The Hill. GOP seeking doctors to back reopening strategy, according to a report. The Trump campaign and allies of the president are reportedly looking for doctors to speak in support of the Trump administration's efforts to stop the spread of coronavirus. What they're really going at here is they're looking for doctors who are willing to sign on and say, I'm a doctor and I think the reopening and who cares about lack of testing are all good things. The Associated Press reported Tuesday on GOP operatives discussed recruiting, quote, extremely pro-Trump, unquote, doctors, although they should have put doctors in separate quotes, to the campaign's cause during a May 11th conference call, audio of which was leaked to the AP by a progressive group. The doctors sought out by the Trump campaign will endorse a view that state economies should be reopened as quickly as possible, a view often espoused by the president that has clashed with state leaders around the country, because the state leaders around the country are informed by actual real doctors. So they're looking for people crazy enough to say that they're doctors, whether they are or aren't, and that they agree with the president. Now, what has happened to the various crazy doctors that have said that they were the president's physician in the past? I don't know. They're still alive, but for some reason they can't get any of those people to do what they need to do, so they're looking for new ones. There's more to the story, but I want to move on to other ones. I'll just point that out. Keep an eye out for that one. Let's see. Oh, yes, right. There was a New York Times article that I alluded to, but we might share in totality maybe tomorrow, being Friday. There's also the news, in addition to the cover-up of the numbers down in Florida. Interesting piece from the Miami Herald that deserves further investigation. Florida knew a COVID-19 pandemic was likely. State leaders didn't warn the public. I scanned it this morning, and it seems like the state government in Florida got earlier warning than you would have think they had on hand, given how they responded to things, and that they were being urged by public health officials in mid to late February to start shutting things down, and that a pandemic was imminent and the state was uniquely vulnerable. But they chose, A, not to do that, B, not to tell anybody that they serious pandemic was on the way and that we ought to be taking it seriously, even though they had the opportunity to do it much, much earlier than anybody else. They had the smart information and they wouldn't use it. Not only did they not use it, I was pointing out, they did what Trump accuses China of doing, refusing to tell anybody and making sure that they were in a position to take money out of the hands of the college kids who came down there for spring break and made things infinitely worse. So that was kind of interesting. We'll investigate more about that later on. Let's see. We do have to note for the record, I'll take the New York Times headline on this one. Supreme Court blocks release of full Mueller report for now. The court put the case on fast track, calling for the Justice Department to file a petition seeking review by June 1st. Adam Liptak reporting for the New York Times. Essentially, the Supreme Court on Wednesday temporarily blocked the release of parts of the report prepared by Robert Mueller, the special counsel, that was being sought by the House Judiciary Committee. Did you know they were still in court suing for this? They want the unredacted information and grand jury information. This stuff extensively discussed in days long ago when we had Armando on the show to help us understand what was going on and what was being sought. The investigators still looking for it and still willing to say in the House Judiciary Committee that if they get this grand jury material and it has more as yet undisclosed evidence of impeachable crimes by the president, that they might very well impeach him again. But guess what? The Supreme Court is not letting it happen anytime soon, though it isn't an absolute and forever bar to it. But, count on the Republican-dominated Supreme Court to step in and allow that to happen. Whether or not it ends up backfiring and coming out right before the election, we have yet to see. All right. Lastly, I won't be able to share it all, but I will share the fact that it's out there happening. In addition to the fascinating studies of how many lives were saved by the lockdown measures and social distancing measures that we did adopt, Greg mentioned that there's a New York Times article that sort of takes a different and oblique approach to it, pointing out that delays in the lockdown had similar costs. It's the flip side of the same story. That I guess it's intuitive, right? If lockdown saved lives, then delays in lockdowns cost lives. And here, New York officials come in for some very necessary criticism. Although I don't know that I would take it as far as they did. Let me grab the New York Times piece here. Lockdown delays cost at least 36,000 lives, data show. Even small differences in timing would have prevented the worst exponential growth, which by April had subsumed New York City, New Orleans, and other major cities. Not talking a lot about New Orleans. Researchers found. James Glanz and Campbell Robertson put this report together. And I would say the bottom line, but really the top line takeaway here is that the total deaths in the United States on May 3rd was reported as 65,307, and that estimated deaths on May 3rd, if social distancing had started 1 week earlier than it did, are just 29,410, so cutting it more than in half. But they also offer a chart down here somewhere that says, well, they could have gotten it down to 11,000 deaths, down from 65,000 on May 3rd, had they started social distancing 2 weeks earlier. And while that's true, I mean, I guess it follows to say that if they had started 3 weeks earlier, it could have been 500 deaths or something. And if they had started and if we had been social distancing since 2011, we wouldn't have had any of them. My point really here is I'm just thinking back to when we started implementing those stay-at-home orders. And around here, it was actually earlier than in New York, but around here it was about March 11th that they told us that the kids were going to be staying home from school, that we all figured out something serious was going on. Take that a week earlier, then you're talking about March, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 4 days, March 4th. And I think you would have had a hard time convincing us on March 4th that we had to do this thing, even though probably by March 4th we were all aware of it and we're learning, okay, wash your hands, something is coming, and we're not exactly sure whether it's going to reach our shores or not. At that point, it already had, of course. It may have done so months earlier. There's still information coming about that. But 2 weeks earlier, now you're talking about, I'm thinking about how would we have reacted to, yes, schools closed basically for the rest of, that's not what they told us at the time, but schools closed in February 25th or so. I don't know that you would have been able to get anybody to believe that. I don't know how much compliance you would have gotten. I mean, it's great to think about how many deaths were preventable, but I don't know if they were preventable. In fact, I don't know if people really would have complied with those orders that early. But that's just, the data is the data, and it's just another way of looking at the same data that we agreed with yesterday. So I'm not rejecting it. I'm just saying I don't know if you could have convinced anybody to do anything with the data. But it's interesting nonetheless. You should read it. Absolutely. Maybe we can cull through it. Maybe we'll discuss it a little bit more. In the meantime, I can only wish you farewell for the day. Stay tuned for Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. He'll, of course, be touching on at least something that we didn't get the time for. So stay tuned to find out what it might be.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, lots here. How about this? It takes a lot of chutzpah for Roger Stone to go on Fox in the hopes of getting a Trump pardon and claim that he's as innocent as Flynn, given that Flynn has twice said he was guilty. There's that, and there's much more, including news from Sweden and their antibody studies, coming up next. Stay tuned.